How many people know when behavioral biometrics was actually first invented? Is it between 1900 and 1950? 1950 to 1975? 1850 to 1900?
Yeah, that's what I think.
That's the answer. So the history of behavioral biometrics goes back to the 1860s with the invention of the telegraph. As telegraph operators got more experienced in using this new machine, they became recognizable by the way that they would send dash and dot signals. In fact, Allied forces in World War II would verify the authenticity of messages they received by how they were sent. Later on, in the 1960s, with the advent of computers, the first model of human acoustic speech production was created, followed by the development of the first signature recognition system. By 1970, the behavioral components of speech were modeled, and by 1976, we had our first prototype for speech recognition. The first patent in this area was granted in 1977 to a company called VeriPen that was looking at the pressure related to how people would sign their name. Today, and what we're going to talk about, is much, much more sophisticated than this, going beyond how you sign your name or how you talk, your voice and your speech. And today's behavioral biometrics are looking at how people type, how they scroll, how they toggle between fields, a whole host of physical as well as cognitive attributes. When we talk about behavioral biometrics today, we're talking about how we can assess whether people know the information that they're entering, how familiar they are with the application process, how do they engage with an online application. And it's very, very attractive because it's completely passive, right? We don't have to do anything. Our behavior is who we are, and it all runs in the background. And it doesn't require a change in the user experience. So as more and more applications move to the digital channel, this sort of modality takes center stage. Besides being a passive modality, one of the main drivers for the acceptance of behavior is that it can solve problems that traditional forms of cybersecurity can't, such as looking at malware inside a session after a login, identifying very sophisticated social engineering where people themselves are fooled into conducting fraudulent transactions. And for those who are not necessarily in the fraud world, most of the fraud, at least on our side, is found inside authenticated sessions. So this is after PINs, after passwords, after tokens, after device location, and even traditional physical biometrics. And these are all the things that we're going to talk about in a minute. So the main promise is not only the passive nature of it, but the fact that it can provide continuous authentication throughout the whole user's journey. The latest analyst report show that this space is growing at a compound annual growth rate of 24%. So I must say that when I got involved with this 2.5 years ago, nobody knew what behavioral biometrics was. If I had asked this question, like I said, maybe 4 months ago, fewer hands, would be raised. 2.5 years ago, nobody knew what I was talking about. And anytime a technology experiences this kind of fast growth and appeal, there are many, many misconceptions that float around. So we're here to set the record straight and to show the link between behavioral biometrics and the broader digital identity space in a meaningful way. So we're going to use the next 45 minutes to get into the heart of the digital identity discussion and the link between the broader digital identity discussion and what our companies are all doing. Where does the technology fit into the framework? What is the difference between behavioral biometrics and something called behavioral analytics? Beyond identity, are there other predictive elements? Are there other use cases? Where can this technology actually go? And we only have very little time, so we'll just scratch the surface. So before we get started, as I said, let's invite everybody to introduce themselves and their companies, and then we'll go.